Today on the podcast, I'm joined by a very special guest, Professor Shona Halson. She is one of the world's probably most respected researchers in the field of sleep and recovery and athletic performance. She spent 16 years at the AIS as the senior physiologist and head of discipline, where she worked directly with elite athletes on optimizing their performance and recovery. She's also been at the front line of Olympic level performance, serving as the recovery coordinator at the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the recovery director in London 2012, and recovery lead for Rio in 2016. Shona has published more than 160 peer-reviewed articles and multiple book chapters in topics like sleep, fatigue, recovery strategies, overtraining, and jet lag. Her current research projects at ACU include studying sleep across the menstrual cycle, which I'm very interested in. I might pick your brain on that off air, if that's okay. Mental fatigue in athletes and the relationship between nutrition and sleep, which again, super interests me. She's on the International Journal Review panel for multiple major papers, has held editorial roles, consults to Australian Open Tennis, is on the Nike Performance Council, and was awarded the ESSA Female Scientist of the Year 2019, among so many other things, Shona. So many other things. So as you can tell, she's pretty well accomplished, and I'm so grateful that she said yes to coming on the podcast. What I wanted to dive in with Shona about is wearable technology. So particularly things like Whoop bands and Oura rings, and how triathletes can use these devices to monitor things like sleep and recovery and training. But with so many of us collecting data around the clock, the challenge is actually knowing what is useful and what is just noise. So in this episode, Shona's going to help us unpack some of that science, debunk some of the hypes and myths, and share some practical ways that triathletes can use wearable technology to train harder, recover as best as they can, and ultimately perform at their best. Welcome to the podcast, Shona.
Yeah, thanks so much. Looking forward to it. Can't wait to chat all things wearables.
Let's get nerdy. Now, triathletes are obsessed with data. They love all the things, pace, watts, heart rate, HRV, sleep, training stress balance, all the things. You name it, they are tracking it, whether it's on their device, on their phone, or they've got spreadsheets for everything. And with so many of us now wearing these wearable devices like Whoop and Oura, we're monitoring our bodies every minute of every day. But the big question really is, how accurate are they? And are they really worth the investment? So you've led countless research studies trying to compare these devices to the gold standards in things like sleep and recovery science. So I'd love for you to share some of your insights around how they stack up and which metrics we can trust and where we might need to be a little bit cautious. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of wearables, you've built this amazing career around sleep and recovery and athletic performance and published so widely. What first sparked your interest in heading down this recovery path in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was really interested in overtraining early days. So my PhD was actually in overtraining in cyclists, or overreaching really, because you can't intentionally overtrain anyone and get ethics approval to do it. So my PhD research was on overreaching and really sort of trying to understand the concept of fatigue. And when I sort of realised how challenging fatigue was to understand, it kind of made sense then to move towards recovery. If it's really challenging to understand fatigue, at least maybe we can try and combat what we do have from a fatigue perspective with recovery. And it was kind of an emerging science back then in 2002, and the AIS actually had a position advertised right when I finished my PhD, which was called a fatigue and recovery scientist. And I was like, that sounds like me. But of course, the focus in the end ended up being way more on recovery than it was on fatigue. So that was kind of what got me interested in recovery. And then sleep became a massive part of recovery the more time I was spending in recovery and research and working with athletes.
And recovery is where the magic happens, right? Without that, we don't adapt from training. So it's kind of the thing.
Yeah, the magic sauce. Yeah. And that's, I think, the thing that can be hard for people, especially athletes who do large volumes, to really understand, is that we know you need the training. We've always known you've needed to train, but you can't train 24 hours a day, right? The body actually needs time to rest and recover, and that is where the adaptation actually occurs. And the best way to avoid, we talk about now, can you really overtrain or can you just under recover? And I think in my 25 odd years working in elite sport, I've probably only seen 3 or 4 really overtrained athletes, like proper diagnosis of overtraining, where the source of the fatigue couldn't really be identified other than maybe what they were doing from a training and recovery perspective. And all of those athletes, even though it's a small number, were having challenges with sleep or stress or things that were getting in the way of recovery. So I think, having more of a focus on recovery and just understanding that, yes, that's where the good stuff happens, and that to adapt, you need to balance the training and recovery as good as you can.
I think triathletes all probably breathed a sigh of relief there to know that they will struggle to overtrain. But what were those 3 athletes? What sport were they in?
One was that we had a rower, a water polo player, and a sprint track cyclist.
Okay, so no triathletes, which surprises me.
It was interesting though, because again, it's probably not so much about the training, but it's about the recovery. And in 2 of them, they were doing shift work. And, again, you may see that in some triathletes as well, some especially age group triathletes, like people who actually have to have a job, which, some of us do. Elite sport is a job, but, for those of us mere mortals that actually have to work, and we need shift workers. The world doesn't survive without shift workers. So we're seeing more and more shift workers. And I think that the issues with sleep is where we can really lead to that idea of non-functional overreaching or overtraining.
Yeah, interesting. So, you've put devices like the Whoop Band through validation studies to measure against, gold standard measures for sleep. What are some of the key things that you learned from doing that and around how accurate they are?
Yeah, so it's such a good question. And I think there's different aspects of the devices in terms of the signals that that the device uses. And there's different aspects and different quality of the information that we get from them. So I would say, as a pretty blanket rule, when you look at things like the Oura and the Whoop, they're very similar in terms of the quality of the data that they give you. And they're probably a step above things like Fitbit, Garmin, those kinds of things.
So many these days.
There are so many. I would say that Aura's primarily was developed for sleep early on, where Whoop was probably a little bit more developed for training. So Aura's metrics are very, very slightly better than Whoop. But look, they're advancing at great rates. They're changing algorithms, they're improving things and their sensors, continually. So they're getting better and better. When you look at, again, Oura and Whoop, and you look at their heart rate and heart rate variability, so their overnight physiological measures, they're actually really good. They compare really well to an ECG. In a lab, having heart rate and heart rate variability measured with the gold standard, very, very similar. When you get to the sleep measures, there's a few different aspects to that. So if you think of the 2 most common aspects, so we have 2-state sleep and we have multi-state sleep. So 2-state sleep is, are you awake and are you asleep? Multi-state sleep is the phases of sleep that people have probably heard of: REM sleep, non-REM sleep, etc. Yep. So with the 2-state sleep, are you awake or are you asleep? Most of the devices are really, really good. Even like a Fitbit will give you really good information. So bedtime, wake time, and percentage of that time you're asleep, which is based on movement. It's based on activity, and that's been used in sleep science forever and ever. So we're really happy with 2-state sleep. Then what happens is that the devices and the algorithms and everything, they kind of get a little trickier, and they throw in other metrics into that equation, into the algorithm, to get non-REM sleep, deep sleep, light sleep, etc. Now, they're not quite as good as the gold standard, which is polysomnography. So they're not quite as good as the gold standard, but they're not bad, and they're getting better and better. So to the point where now I feel like even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have published a paper using Oura or Whoop that wasn't a validation paper. Now I feel like the quality of the data is good, and we understand the pros and cons enough to be able to publish. And of course, the beauty of using Oura and Whoop and these types of devices is that you can get out into the real world, you can get outside of the lab, and you can measure lots and lots and lots of people quite easily. So we get more data just in a different way. So I'm really comfortable with 2-state sleep. Multi-state sleep, not as good as the gold standard, but if I'm an athlete and I'm not interested in research and what I want to do is track these metrics for myself, all I would say is, one, don't compare yourself to anyone else, like especially if you've got different devices. Like I'm wearing an Oura, I wouldn't compare my deep sleep or my REM sleep to someone wearing a Whoop. Calculated differently, most likely. Algorithms, we don't know exactly what goes into them to calculate exactly those measures. So don't compare yourself to anyone else, especially people with different devices, and look for decent changes over time. So don't look for a change in like 1% of deep sleep night to night. Like that's just going to happen. What really you want to do is look for big changes over time and then go, okay, I've had a 10% change in my deep sleep. Maybe that's something. Is it the alcohol I had the night before? Or is it something else that's going on? So you can use it for yourself to get some general information. Then the third aspect, so there's 2-state sleep, multi-state sleep, and then they give you these scores. Recovery score, readiness score, whatever it might be. And again, we really don't know much about those. Probably not designed for athletes. So I'm a little bit cautious about using those. But I find for me, they actually seem pretty good. But to me, what I'm more interested in is let's go back and let's look at the metrics that go into that score. So if my score drops, what did I do? What happened? Was it short sleep duration? Was my heart rate variability tanked? Like what actually was it that contributed to that score rather than the score itself?
So much to unpack there.
No, sorry. That was like my TED talk. Thanks very much. That was like my 3 minutes. Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
No, see you later. No, but that's, I guess, as a quick summary of sort of what we know. But I will say they're getting better and better. So the quality of the sensors, the quality of their algorithms are continuing to improve.
Well, if the research lady is wearing an Oura ring, then it can't be too bad.
I am, and I will say that I have no financial affiliation with any sleep monitoring device. We pay, well, the university pays for all our sleep monitoring devices. So I don't. We just use the one that we think is best from a research perspective, but then also like what the athletes will wear. And sometimes it's Whoop. Athletes are more likely to wear a watch. Sometimes they're more likely to wear a ring. So that's kind of where we sit.
Do you know on the sleep stages how much an athlete needs in particular stages? Do we know that information yet?
No, and it's really highly variable. People talk about, generally we think athletes probably need more deep sleep because that's the aspect of sleep that involves physical recovery. Yep. And the REM sleep involves more cognitive recovery, so more brain recovery. So there might be sports where brain recovery is something that's more important, but what we know about actual sleep, say if you've got 8 hours of sleep, the first half is more weighted towards deep sleep. So you get more deep than REM sleep, and the second half of sleep, you get more REM sleep than deep sleep. So it's just, you still get some of both in each of the first and second half, but you get a bit more REM in the second half, a bit more deep in the first half. And what we tend to do as individuals, as we cut sleep shorter and shorter, we're cutting off more so that REM sleep. And so that's why sometimes you can have a bit of brain fog, or, why you shouldn't often drive cars when you're really fatigued, because it's that REM sleep that goes. So we don't really know what percentage is good for athletes. I would say that it is also highly, highly variable, and it's hard to change as well. So just so you go, we need great to have 35% deep sleep rather than 25. We don't really know how you'd actually get more anyway.
Don't have kids is what you do.
Don't have kids. Sounds wise.
Kills it.
Kills everything.
For a triathlete that has to get up early to do training and, can't get that good quality sleep overnight or not enough sleep overnight, how much does napping come into effect to improve our overall sleep quality and duration?
Yeah, napping for athletes who have to wake up early, so who have short sleep durations, is about the only way that you can cope, because there's only sort of two things that help you get over sleep deprivation. And the first one, of course, is to sleep. Sleep is
Yep.
really the way. The second way is caffeine, but it's going to be short term, as you know, and it could influence your nighttime sleep if you have it too late. So really the key is to nap. If you look at, swimmers, for example, I've worked a lot with swimmers over the years and they can get up really early, like triathletes and rowers. The science says they have some of the poorest sleep of any athletes. So the earlier you get up, generally speaking, the shorter sleep you're going to get. And then the challenge comes, well, okay, if you're an elite athlete, you might have time during the day to nap. But for those of us that don't have time, it becomes a real challenge. So you either have to go to bed really early, which doesn't always work, or you have to nap. And then we can get into the weeds around good naps and bad naps. But napping, if you're sleep deprived, is the only way that you're really going to be able to add more sleep to your 24-hour block of time.
And what's the best way to nap then?
Yeah, so napping is really interesting because there's different kinds of naps, right? So there's the nap you have because you're sleep deprived, most common nap. There's the nap that you have because you're going to be sleep deprived, right? So you know that you're going to have... It's the prophylactic nap, exactly. And then there's the nap that we call the appetitive nap, which is just a nap that because you like having a little nap and you're a bit bored or you've got nothing else to do, so you have a little sleep.
The luxury of having so much time.
I know. I say that to people and they're like, who does that? And I'm like,
retired people.
Many. Yeah, exactly. People with a lot of time on their hands. So the thing that I'd say about, the prophylactic nap, you might see that for like professional footballers who are going to play a night game and not going to sleep, and then maybe they're going to get on a plane and travel to Perth or whatever. So prophylactic naps you see, and in shift workers and those kinds of people, of course. But the nap that you have when you're sleep deprived, again, most common, and it can be really, really helpful. The key to it is to nap as early in the day as you possibly can, because you want to still build up sleep pressure before you go to bed at night. So, for example, an athletes, and I've had swimmers say to me, I sleep for 3 hours during the day, but I still go to bed at my normal time and I still sleep. I fall asleep quickly. I'm still good for my nighttime sleep. And they go, fantastic. But if they say to me, look, I'm sleeping 2 hours in the afternoon at like 2:30 till 4:30 on their off days, and then I can't sleep properly at night, that's when you know your nap's not been great. So earlier in the day is good, and you don't want it to interfere with your nighttime sleep. Now, some of the research that we've done has shown that athletes are probably sleeping about 90 minutes less per night than they feel they need to feel good. So we can't say how much each person needs to sleep, but we can ask them how much sleep do they feel that they should be getting to sleep well. And we see about 90 minutes per night less than they feel like they need to feel good. And of course, the athletes that wake up early in the morning, like your triathletes, are the ones that tend to have a bigger discrepancy. So it's more like 2 hours less that they're getting. And so, again, that's where naps are going to be really, really useful if you can get them.
And is there a particular duration that you want to get? Like we talk about or hear about a nap being too short or too long and you wake up feeling groggy because you've woken up in the wrong cycle of sleep. What's the optimal nap duration?
Yeah, I'm going to be the classic scientist and say it depends, because what it depends on is how sleep deprived you are, right? So if you're someone who's just getting like 6.5 hours all the time and you kind of really would like to be getting maybe 7.5, a 30 to 40 minute nap will make you feel pretty good. If you're someone who's had a trip, or you're really sleep deprived, or you've got no sleep during the day, you might be able to go more like the 90 minutes to 2 hours and still be functioning fine. So I always think it's best not to think about, I'm not going to dictate my nap duration. I'm going to just be a little bit flexible depending on how sleep deprived I am. And if I've practiced my naps enough, I'll be able to know what's going to interfere with my nighttime sleep or not based on how deprived I am.
Yeah, nice. I love the caffeine paper too that dove into how much caffeine you can have in the duration to going to bed so that you know when you could dose your caffeine and still not affect your nighttime sleep. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, look, I mean, I love the caffeine sleep story. I think it's so interesting. I think it's interesting particularly for athletes who are taking caffeine for performance. Where it gets a bit messy is when athletes take it for training, especially if they're doing afternoon training, and that might be pre-workouts, it might just be a cup of coffee, whatever it is, and it's the afternoon hit that's the concern. And obviously we know that athletes are sleep deprived, so they have a lot of coffee or have a lot of caffeine, so they can get into this sort of wicked cycle. And so all the sleep, the reason why I started getting interested in that, not just because of athletes and how much caffeine they consume, but you see all the sleep societies say, create a caffeine cutoff, and no one tells you what time it is. So that's what we try to do, is to start to explore that and caffeine genetics and those kinds of things to see if we can, be a little bit more prescriptive with timing of caffeine intake.
It was good. I think a lot of people were surprised by the long duration, but it makes sense. It makes sense.
Oh, no, we all know the half-life of caffeine, right? And some of that work was based on just one cup of coffee, because that's all we can do in terms of modelling previous papers. But, some people are whacking down 5 coffees before cut-off time, which is probably, obviously, likely to be worse. So,
So going back to the wearables, look, one of the biggest selling points about the Whoop bands and the Oura rings is the recovery scores and the HRV data. And you've just said that it's really good HRV data. How can a triathlete then interpret that to make kind of daily decisions around training, or do they need to disregard those daily decisions and more look at it over a long-term trend?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. I think you look at it in both ways, but I would definitely acutely as well as long term. But I think the key to it is to say that it's one tool in the toolbox, right? It's not the be all and end all. It wouldn't be the one thing that I would make all my decisions on. And one of the reasons I say that is because what if you've got a lot of muscle soreness? Devices don't know that, right? They're assessing cardiovascular measures and they're assessing sleep measures, movement measures during sleep, and cardiovascular measures. So there's a whole lot of stuff that it doesn't get at. It's one part of the puzzle. HRV, sleeping HRV and sleeping heart rate, so both of those, measuring overnight during sleep is such a nice way to measure those, because it's a long period of time. And there's a lot less influence on them than, say, you wake up in the morning and you check your resting heart rate and you go, oh, what if you've woken up to an alarm? What if you've woken up thinking, oh, my gosh, I have the worst day of my life ahead of me because I've got to do this thing that I don't want to do, right? So that couple of minutes of resting morning heart rate is very different to nocturnal heart rate and heart rate variability. Now, as part of, my whole career, I've always disliked HRV. Morning measures of HRV, like I do get it, but it's so variable. And now I'm sort of turning a new leaf, because HRV during sleep and heart rate during sleep, I think, are interesting. So HRV during sleep will really tell you about what you've done in the lead up to that night that's going to influence your sleep. So anyone who's ever measured their sleep with a wearable will know that HRV tanks with alcohol. It will really drop. It will really drop when you're sick. It may drop if you've eaten quite closely to bedtime, or your heart rate might drop much later in the night if you've eaten too close to bedtime. So I think you can kind of use these metrics acutely. Heart rate variability will have a greater magnitude of change in response to things than heart rate. Like your heart rate will go around a few beats unless you're sick, but your heart rate variability, you can really notice a big jump. The way that I tend to use it more is to be like, look, maybe if it was alcohol or if sickness or something like that that's dropped your overnight HRV, I might modify training, or I might think about the type of training that's being done as one of the things that you might factor in. So I think the overnight measures are really good. If you do morning measures, say of these metrics, and they're accurate, you do them consistently, they're more likely to tell you about your readiness to perform that day. So your heart rate, your overnight metrics are more likely to tell you about what you did the day before, and your morning metrics are more likely to give you a bit of prescriptive information about readiness to go that day. But again, you've really got to know yourself and know what things influence those. Just because values are high or low acutely doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater and not train.
Quit. Done.
Exactly. And when you're looking more long term, I think you can start to get into some of those overreaching kind of markers. And we don't know much about the wearables and energy availability, particularly low energy availability. We've got some work that we're doing now with Louise Burke, who
Nice.
I know you know very well, with the new metabolic chamber down in ACU. So we're doing some work on low energy availability in the metabolic chamber to really understand what that does and how quickly heart rate or heart rate variability changes in regards to low energy availability.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned the heart rate drop in the night. Is there a key window where that is meant to happen? And is there anything else that affects that other than a large meal before bed?
Yeah, look, generally you should sort of see a pretty stable heart rate across the night, generally speaking. A little bit of a drop towards the end, potentially, but usually when these devices talk about a drop towards the end of the night, it just means it's high at the start of the night. And the things that we've seen typically is the meal. Sometimes caffeine, you might see that a little bit as well. And yeah, they're probably the main ones that we've seen. Of course, alcohol is going to be, alcohol is just worse than both of those things combined. So you might see some changes with alcohol, but then everyone's super individual. So, it's just kind of, the reason I do like using wearables with athletes is if they're the sort of people that are inquisitive, and like triathletes often are, and like you say, they like the numbers. And I don't use it for really making too many decisions for the next day, but what did I do wrong or what did I do good the day before? Like, when did I stop my caffeine? Or did I have a good day in terms of not being super stressed? Or, what was the stuff that did I have a good exercise day, just the right amount, that kind of thing. So I think that's where it can be useful. But again, we don't want people to get super on the numbers and obsessive with the numbers. We just want people to use it as a bit of a guide to how they might go about their day, but more importantly, how they might change their behaviours, particularly the behaviours that are bad for sleep.
I think a lot of athletes wearing them has really highlighted the negative effects of alcohol, because a lot of people think, I can have a glass of wine at night and it doesn't do anything. I fall asleep super easy, but then it shows really clearly your sleep quality tanks and your duration might not be as good with just one glass. I think that's really been useful to highlight that to people, because before they were like, no, I can do that and I'm okay. Or I can have a cup of coffee right before bed and it doesn't do anything for my sleep. And it shows so clearly that it does.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you just said there. And one of the things that we also learnt with that caffeine work is that people's quality of sleep decreases with caffeine, or can decrease with caffeine. But of course, that's not something you really know unless you measure it, right? So people think, I fall asleep fine. And I'm like, well, one, it probably means you're so sleep deprived that your body's overriding the amount of caffeine that you've had, which is not good. But two, you also get a decrease in your quality of sleep, which is, that's really important to factor in, but people don't recognise that.
I've also heard that you wake up at around sort of 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning if you've over-caffeinated. Is there any science behind that?
Yeah, I haven't heard that specifically. I have heard it anecdotally. I haven't really heard the science sort of behind that, but I guess, part of the reason for that could be is if you're just generally getting lighter sleep, you're more likely to wake up at noises or to go to the bathroom. And we do see when we measure people's sleep that they often go to the bathroom about the same time of night. And so whether that's just, are you sleeping lighter and now you're more likely to wake up because you need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm going to send this podcast episode to my husband, who has about 4 coffees a day, like double shots, and thinks he's fine because he's snoring within about 3 seconds. But often he wakes up early. Anyway, he's going to be listening to this one. He won't listen to me. One of the things you're currently doing is researching sleep across the menstrual cycle, which I'm so interested in. Is there any insight that you can give us before that research is published?
Yeah, we've done we've got 2 papers out, but some more papers that are coming that are going to be better measures, more hormonal measures, etc. But generally, the summary is if you have a fairly healthy menstrual cycle, or you have low menstrual cycle symptoms, you're probably not going to have any influence on sleep. So the research that we've done so far suggests that it's not phases of sleep. So it's not estrogen and progesterone concentrations that are going to mess with your sleep. It's symptoms. And so managing symptoms, which, I could have asked any female this, right? They would have said, oh, how much money did you spend to tell us that? It's like sometimes you've got to do the science to debunk all the rest of the stuff that's out there. And so it's probably not hormonal concentrations. It's more than likely. But the big caveat around that is menstrual cycle dysfunction. And we see a lot of that in athletes. We've got a study going now, and we don't have the data from that, but I suspect that people with menstrual cycle dysfunction or menstrual dysfunction of some kind will have poorer sleep, potentially due to really different hormones or potentially just due to the symptoms. But then when you get to perimenopause, menopause, pregnancy, where the hormones are wild and crazy, then yes, you're probably going to have some challenges around sleep. But if you're a healthy female, you're on hormonal contraception, or you've got a natural menstrual cycle that's healthy, minimal symptoms, I would say very little influence on sleep, which is really important because we don't include females in sleep intervention research or a lot of other forms of research because we're so worried about their hormone concentrations and what that's going to do to their sleep. But if you measure their cycle length and you measure whether they've got symptoms or not, you're probably in a pretty good place. Obviously, if you can do all the hormones and everything as well, that's fantastic. But maybe the idea now that we're starting to see performance isn't different across the cycle. You don't need to train differently across the cycle. Your sleep's not different across the cycle. Just means that we can just calm down everyone, just be a female and just train for your sport. Don't train for your hormones or your phases. Just train like a normal athlete.
Here. Well said.
Thanks. That's my high horse. Yeah.
I love it.
And it's interesting because you do see now on social media, I saw something the other day and it was great. It was just people, because we didn't have the research on females, we thought we were so different to males. And maybe we're not, right, when it comes to certain aspects of performance and recovery and sleep. So just because it wasn't measured didn't mean that we had to jump to all these conclusions that we need to reinvent the wheel and we need to train differently in luteal versus follicular, which how do you do that anyway, right? So I think, there's more research we do that shows no findings. Normally in science, you don't find a finding, people go, oh, that's bad. You don't find a finding, it's actually probably a good thing.
I've always tracked my cycle and I did the opposite of what people were saying, the certain phase you're meant to feel good, I felt crap, and the other phase you're meant to feel crap, I felt good. And so I'm like, whatever. Yeah. I think it really comes down to working with an individual athlete, right, and understanding them and their symptoms and what they're doing and then applying what you know to them to help that one person rather than blanketly going, everyone needs to do this.
Yes. Yes, no, it's so true. And because we talk about, well, if you've got symptoms, you might just auto-regulate your training. And so you might go, if you feel good, you might train a bit harder. If you've got a lot of symptoms, you might drop. But that's auto-regulatory training that's been done for 60 years, right? Men train like that too. They're just not basing their decisions off the menstrual cycle. That's just good training practices, right? Yeah. So I think we can, maybe as the research progresses, we'll find more things where women are different, maybe. But so far it's looking, which is great news for us. Let's just be consistent and let's just train with the best of our ability rather than let's not overcomplicate it and make it harder for women, more than it already is.
Sounds good. Is there anything in the devices, the wearable devices, that could help a female, though, in terms of tracking cycle, tracking sleep? Because they do track your cycle in the wearables. You can track your temperature and it tells you kind of what phase you're in. Is there any benefit, or should a female triathlete be looking at something in particular to help with their training and sleeping?
Yeah, great question. So temperature is the thing that I would look at. So only if you're naturally cycling. Obviously, if you're on hormonal contraception, your temperature, you shouldn't ovulate, right? So depending on the type of hormonal contraception, some IUDs, you may still ovulate. But generally speaking, if you're on hormonal contraception, traditional forms, you won't ovulate, which means your temperature will stay consistent throughout the cycle. If you're naturally cycling and you do ovulate, you'll have the rise in temperature that occurs in the second half of the cycle. So you can see it very clearly. We're analysing some data at the moment. You can see it with the Oura ring and it tracks ovulation pretty nicely. So that's a good sign to say, obviously if you're ovulating, that's a healthy cycle, healthy athlete potentially from that regard. So yes, if you're naturally cycling, you could use temperature to look for that change that occurs around ovulation. And then you could just use the devices as a way of tracking the length of your cycle. So you can mark start and end, you can mark bleed days. So you can just start to monitor that over time. Where the devices, what they can't do, or what apps can't do, is tell you what phase you are in. Unless you've measured ovulation or unless you've monitored your hormones, you don't know if you're early follicular, late follicular, like what phase you're in. So if you look for the rise in ovulation, you might be able to say follicular versus luteal. But for me, if I was using it, I wouldn't care so much about that. I'd just be interested in, am I ovulating or not if I'm naturally cycling.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So for triathletes that want to use wearables or use wearables, because I think probably 85% of people listening have a wearable of some description, what are your top 3 evidence-based tips for making the most of these devices without just getting overwhelmed and lost in the data?
I've got to keep it to 3. Okay.
You have as many as you want, Shona.
No, I'll try to go in order of importance. I would, as I said, look for big change. So don't lose your minds over one bad night. The body's really good. Usually one bad night, the next night's pretty good. So don't get too concerned with having one bad night. Bedtime, wake time, and sleep quality. So you'll get what bedtime and wake time will give you is consistency. And we want to be as consistent with our bed and wake times as possible. And percentage quality, they're good metrics. And I'd just be that they're the most important things to track. Consistent bed and wake time, which gives you duration, as well as a percentage quality. I don't pay a huge amount of attention to sleep stages. They're interesting, but I don't really hang my hat on those. I would say if you're someone that gets really obsessed and caught up in the numbers, that monitoring may not be for you. Maybe that 1 in 10 people we're starting to see that might be a problem. Some athletes, though, I think that it might be the first time that they've ever paid attention to their sleep, and their sleep's really bad. It's not the device, it's not the numbers. It's just them finally getting realization and a number to say that their sleep's not great. And then the final thing would be use it as a conversation starter. If you've got problems, going to see a doctor or going to see someone and saying, look, these are the numbers. If you can't fix it yourself, then using it to go and see a professional who might be able to help you.
That was 3. You did it.
Right. I'll stop there because I think they're the most important ones.
And do you have a particular device that you think is better than the others?
No, I don't really. Look, like I say, I think it comes down to what athletes are happy to wear and what's most comfortable for them in their sport. I like Oura because, one, I'm not an athlete. I'm not using, using my hands a lot for sport. So I find it easy to wear, pretty inconspicuous, and it doesn't, like the Whoop, the thing that I don't like about it is it doesn't tell the time, right? So you got to wear 2 watches. I'm sure they'll change that if they haven't changed it already. So I generally like Oura, but I have no issue with Whoop. I think it gives you good data. And I think if that's what you like to wear, then because that's easy for you or more convenient for your sport, then that's totally fine.
And what about any of the other products that are coming on the market? Like there's ultra-human rings at the moment. There's more and more, and there will be more and more over time. Is something like that just as good as Oura, or do we have to stick with just the Oura lane if we're looking at the ring device?
Yeah, we don't know much from a validation perspective around the ultra-human, so I've steered clear of it because we tend to use our devices for research. If the validation studies come out and say that it's good, it might be something we consider. The challenge, though, about wearables and where I think ultra-human could have an advantage is if they don't have a membership fee. They don't have a monthly fee.
Yeah.
And that's where they'll get people. And if I was just someone who was interested in tracking my own sleep, that could be an option because you don't have to pay a membership fee. But often what happens, and I'm not saying that ultra-human will do this, but a lot of companies start out without a membership fee. They get you hooked on the device and then they start charging a membership fee or they raise their membership fees. So that's where I think that if I was to create my own wearable, I would, understand why companies do have membership fees and subscription fees because that's how they make their money. But the other thing is, the app interface is also really important because they're just giving you so much data now. So making sure that it's easy to, I've only seen the Ultra Human app once. It looked quite good, but I think that's the other thing to be cognizant of is giving people a stack of numbers that they don't know what to do with. So the devices that come out with more prescriptive information. So Oura has Oura AI and they can give you insights, and that can be quite useful as well.
Yeah, I'm actually wearing an Ultra Human at the moment to test it out, looking for, other reasons. And I've found it quite useful, but I haven't used Oura. One of the things I found really useful as a sleep deprived parent was the caffeine window where you should, when you can start having caffeine. Because like in the depths of sleep deprivation phase, like I'd start my day with a coffee and just feel rubbish. And it's like a big progressive feeling more rubbish. But that provides a window where you can start caffeine, what they call clear brain waste. And I found that really useful to help increase my energy levels.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that, if it works for you, then absolutely, then keep doing it. And when you've got the data and the insights, it's very different to, having someone say, oh, you shouldn't have coffee in the morning. Well, maybe some people should, maybe some people shouldn't. But I think when you've got the data, that it can help you make really informed decisions about your own health, which is great.
So if you could design the ultimate ideal Shona Halson wearable, what features would it need to have?
I'd have it be able to really track and pick up instantly different types of exercise. So like the Apple Watch does. You're on a rowing machine. It goes, are you rowing? You go, yes, I am. I would try to incorporate brain activity. So a sensor on the forehead that integrates with it, that will give you really good metrics for the sleep stages.
So you go to bed wearing something.
Yeah, go to bed wearing something on your forehead if you're really into your sleep stages. I think the insights is the really important thing. So I always say the devices gives you numbers, but it doesn't always give you context as to why those numbers are there. And if it can say, well, look, and you start tagging things, or start saying, did you have alcohol? Did you have caffeine? You can start, and then might be able to create a bit of a picture then with some actual recommendations. I think that would be super cool. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, always the practitioner, right? Like, how do I apply that to what you actually do in real life?
Yeah, 100%.
Data for data's sake is not that helpful.
No, it's not. And I see that with some teams and sports saying, we're monitoring sleep. I'm like, you're ticking a box. Like, you're not, what are you doing with the data and how are you helping the athletes as a consequence of that? So, doing something with the numbers. If you want to change behavior, as a dietitian, if you want to change behavior, you've got to have the insights and the information and the knowledge to be able to do that.
Yep, I agree. Well, Shona, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today and sharing all of that brain power and your expertise in this space. I think people have probably taken a lot away from it around, sleep, but also wearables like the Whoop and the Oura, and being smarter about the way that they use it and being more practical too, I think, which is really helpful, particularly in the triathlete population where I reckon most people have one and how they're actually using it is potentially questionable though. And if, you're listening and you want to go beyond the numbers around wearables and do something about it, then, tracking's the first step, and then applying that in practice, I think, is the second step, which is really important. Thank you, Shona. Where can people find you if they want to dive a bit deeper into your research and maybe put a bit of a flag around that female sleep stage cycle stuff when it comes out?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best one. The best one where I keep most updated and where we sort of put our papers on when they come out. So LinkedIn would be the one.
All right, I'll link that in the show notes so people can find you. But thank you so much, Shona. And thank you for tuning in. I'll see you next week.